I like coming to Fort Snelling in the winter. It's free of visitors and serenely quiet. Without the foliage, the sight lines are excellent and offer impressive vistas from several vantage points. In addition, the harsh weather is a stark reminder of the conditions early residents had to endure. Fort Snelling has had an illustrious and notable past. For decades, it served as the military, commercial, and social center of the region. Well-known soldiers assigned to the fort included Zachary Taylor, Jefferson Davis, and the artist Seth Eastman. Explorers, including Henry Schoolcraft, Joseph Nicolay, and Count Beltrami, stopped here before continuing on their journeys through the wilderness. In later years, Fort Snelling was the site of the Dakota Internment. In the 20th century, it served as an induction and training center during the First and Second World War, before being decommissioned in 1946. Fort Snelling has been the focus of artistic endeavors for generations. I'm Brian Zott, Curator of Art for the Minnesota Historical Society, and I'm talking today about picturing Fort Snelling in art and photography. Built on land purchased from the Indians by Zebulon Pike in 1805, the construction of Fort St. Anthony, as it was originally called, began in earnest in the summer of 1820, as soon as Colonel Josiah Snelling arrived. His predecessor had sited the fort slightly away from the bluffs for maximum military advantage. Snelling, not fearing an attack by British or any other force, preferred the more dramatic and impressive location on the bluffs directly above the confluence of the Mississippi and what is now called the Minnesota rivers, at the crossroads between the civilization and the wilderness. And what a sight indeed! Imagine the reaction of visitors after a long journey up the river through the vast stretches of unspoiled territory when they saw the gleaming whitewashed walls of the fort made from limestone quarried on location. Early depictions of the fort are rare, but a few do exist. There are sketches from the 1820s by early settlers such as the Swiss artist Peter Rindesbacher, and of course soldiers such as the 26-year-old Seth Eastman, who drew this sketch during his first tour of duty in 1833. Of all the artists, Seth Eastman is the most affiliated with Fort Snelling. After his brief 1830s stint, Eastman returned as post commandant in the 1840s, sketching and painting sights and scenes around the fort and along the rivers. The fort as a focal point picked up momentum during Minnesota's territorial period. Settlement and trade had quickened during this time, causing a steady stream of visitors and artists. Paintings from the 1850s seem to capture a young nation's entire, yet tiny, foothold on the vast frontier. In the foreground of this painting by Sergeant Edward Thomas, you can see Henry Sibley's commercial interests of Mendota's fur trading post. On the bluffs above, the fort flexes its military muscle. To the left is the U.S. government Indian Agency. So in this single painting, all three legs of the stool that form the American presence on the frontier are represented. These paintings also document the new arrival's ever-increasing environmental impact on the region. Notice how deforested the river valley appears. It's remarkable when compared to earlier written descriptions of a heavily forested river valley. To survive, soldiers and residents were burning thousands of cords of firewood each year. Historical and architectural information about the fort can be better investigated through the Historical Society's extensive collection of photographs. Shortly after the camera arrives to Minnesota around 1850, the fort becomes the subject of the photographer's lens. Here is just a sampling of our photographs from Fort Snelling. These images trace the fort's transition from a military post on the frontier at mid-century to a picturesque park for weekend visitors from the expanding cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul at century's end. Returning to the paintings of Fort Snelling in the late 19th century, as American painters throughout the country focused on the grandeur of the American landscape, Fort Snelling took on an even greater symbolic significance. In the 1880s, the fort was often depicted from a distance in order to capture the unfolding river valley below. These romantic visions portray the fort like an ancient European castle, even at a time when the fort's usefulness as a military outpost was in decline. Could these paintings perhaps be tinged with a nostalgia for the fort's splendid past? One of the most stunning paintings in our collection is this 1888 panorama by Minnesota artist Alexis Fournier. His point of view is from the floodplain at river's edge. High above, the fort towers. Closer inspection reveals that the walls have crumbled. Half Moon Battery is in ruins. Sheep graze lazily below, and traffic on the bridge passes by, oblivious to the fort's heady past. With the advent of a new century, American art changed its focus away from the grand and heroic to the more personal and expressive. The fort, too, had irreversibly changed. Its military functions had moved farther downriver. The original fort, now in disrepair, had become a mere curiosity. The era of the mighty castle on the plains was over. Its relationship to the river lost, a city park dissected and crisscrossed by all modes of transportation, picturesque and completely subdued. And speaking of transportation, for better and for worse, Fort Snelling has been at the hub of Minnesota's transportation history. From canoes and steamboats on the river to ferries and bridges above, and from trolley lines, interstate cloverleaves, and even international air travel, it all seems to have happened under the fort's stately presence. In 1895, on the fort's 75th anniversary, an editorial in the St. Paul Pioneer Press said this: "Few American cities are in possession of a spot at once so historic, so beautiful, and so accessible." This statement still rings true today as 80,000 people visit one of Minnesota Historical Society's most important sites each year. I'm Brian Zott for the Minnesota Historical Society.